Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today's Monday, April the 7th. And here in New Hampshire, I'm looking out my windows and it's snowing. So we have a snowy day on April the 7th. Welcome to New Hampshire. But hey, it's the good news is it's not going to stay. So that's good. But it's coming down pretty good. It's too rainy for it to stick, but it's kind of weird. April 7th, and it's supposed to be full on spring, but here we go. A little bit of snow, but it's fun. Hey, I trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed, ready to begin seize a new day. And today is Monday, April the 7th. And I hope you had a refreshing night's sleep. And we're on now another week in our Casket Empty series. We are in week 3 now, and it's the beginning of the whole Messiah period. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks talking first about Jesus in his, if you have this New Testament Bible study guide, this Casket Empty book, I borrowed my wife's this morning, so she put all the answers in there, so I'm good to go. But one of the things here that we'll see is you have week 3 is now going to be all about this Messiah has come. And then when we finish week 3, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be involved in this whole consideration of Jesus as Messiah. It's going to be about the proclamation of the kingdom. And then on the week of Easter, it's all about him being crucified and resurrected. So we timed this out pretty well so that during this season, we can be filling our minds with who this Messiah is. And that's taken us to the topic for today. And one of the questions that you find in your book is this reference in Matthew's gospel, in Matthew 1:1. And Matthew 1:1, it tells us that Jesus, this is the genealogy, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, when you open up this book, there is this sense now that Matthew is going to begin to start building some bridges between this whole declaration of what God has been giving to us in the Old Testament, and now we're going to see how all of this is being fulfilled in the New. And it's going to be fascinating. Matthew's gospel has numerous references about this fulfillment factor, so that it will constantly bringing us back to the Old Testament. And now, having gone through Casket Empty, we're in a great position to begin to now some of those passages that we read, the importance of certain in Israel, and all of this to get us to a place, right, where we are beginning to see more and more of this whole work of Jesus being accomplished. So there is, in the beginning there, it says, this is the genealogy, right? The book of the genealogy. That word genealogy is the word Genesis. And that's the same, Greek translation of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis. It's the book of beginnings. And here it is firmly establishing that Jesus is the Messiah, right? We do know that Jesus Christ is not his first and last name. Jesus refers to the name that was given at his birth. It is the name that the angels declared that said, you shall call him Jesus. Why? Because the word Jesus means that God saves. And so Jesus has come to save God's people from their sins. So this is a whole rescue moment. It makes you think back in John 3:16, where it says that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So this whole gospel that God, out of love, brought forth his son, bringing us the riches of forgiveness and all that entails. Now we find this in the person of Jesus. So Matthew opens up his gospel by telling us, hey, this is the Christ. Here is the Messiah. He has come. And I'm going to give you a glance, a glimpse as to how, what has previously taken place. And so when he goes on in our books, it's a very interesting, text here, because it begins with Jesus, the Christ, right, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And what's important about this is to recognize, okay, first, there is this mention of the Christ, the Messiah. Then there is this mention of David, right, the son of David. And the other one is a descendant, right, the son of Abraham. And I don't want you to gloss over this sentence, because what this sentence is doing, it's making a huge declaration. It's beginning to give us some sure footing for us to consider the person of Jesus, like who he is and what he's come to do. I could have put a ton of different references here, but what I do want to do for you this morning is just to unpack a little bit about this one phraseology here about who this Jesus is. You know, it's interesting. You can go all the way back. Um, in fact, if you would, um, these are the texts. But if you go back to Luke chapter 4, in Luke chapter 4, Jesus is about to begin his public ministry. And Luke has Jesus coming into the synagogue. And as was the custom, they would gather together, for the Sabbath day. They would open up the scrolls, and it would be read, and then there would be like a commentary. It would be like us going to church today, right? We read some scripture, we have a sermon on the passages, people gather together for worship, all these things, right? And this is the setting in which we find Jesus. He takes the scroll of Isaiah, and he opens up to this scroll, and he reads Isaiah chapter 61. He reads to them of what Isaiah foresaw as the role of the Messiah when he came. Jesus would read these words in Luke 4, and then at the end, he would roll up the scroll, and he would look out at the people and say, today, this passage has been fulfilled in your hearing. What a statement to make. He's announcing that he is this Messiah that was promised. And how is that going to be verified? Well, look at Isaiah chapter 61. And if you look at Isaiah chapter 61, let's read verses 1 and 2. Here we realize that the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is upon him. We do know, right, that it's not long after Jesus's birth. And as he begins to grow, there's going to come a time when Jesus is going to stand before John the Baptist, and he is going to be baptized. Jesus comes representing the people. He has no need to be baptized. Even John the Baptist recognizes that. He says, Lord, I have need to be baptized of you. But Jesus becomes a representative of all the people. And so when he goes through those waters of baptism, it is his baptism whereby we see what? If you remember the scene, right? The Spirit of the Lord descends upon him like a dove. And it says, the skies open. God speaks. God the Father says, this is my son. In him I am well pleased. right? Like, so there's this affirmation that Jesus is, his son. The Spirit of God is anointed him for this work that is about to take place. So now go back and read Isaiah chapter 61 and verses 1 and 2. And here it says, the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me. We saw that at the baptism. Because the Lord has anointed me to do what? To preach good news to the poor. What is that good news? The good news is that the kingdom of God has arrived, that he is the Son of Man that has been promised, that he will come to atone for the sins of men. All of this now is bound up in who Jesus is. This is all the good news that Jesus is about to bring. And he says, and I have brought this good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. See, God is about to set people free from the bondage that we have of sin, all of which is going to be our experience of God's riches at Jesus's expense. Think about that for a moment. God's riches at Christ's expense. If you think of those words, that's an acronym for the word grace. Grace is God's riches at Christ's expense. This is something that God has done for us in his Son. He has brought Jesus now as Messiah to fulfill the very role that he had proclaimed all the way back in Isaiah 61. And there are other places too, but this is one where you go, and Jesus then refers to this back in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. So right off the bat, Matthew opens up this gospel and he says to everyone who has ears to hear, pay attention, because what I'm going to tell you is about the one who had been promised, who is coming not only to preach, but he is going to come to bind up the brokenhearted, to bring freedom for the captives, release from darkness for the prisoners. He has come to set us free, that we might experience this life abundant. But it also goes on to talk about Jesus in the terms of being the son of David. Now, you do remember, right, that way back in 2 Samuel in chapter 7, that God begins to speak to David. David has been a pretty complex kind of person, right? Think about it. David is a warrior. David filled with courage. We saw that as a young man. Remember, David is trotted out to take on Goliath, a young man that was tending sheep. And now he's out there with a slingshot taking on this giant of a man. But David was not afraid, not because, he just, believed it and thought it would happen. No. When you go back and read all those texts, what you find, when you realize is David understood that God had made promises to Israel. And that based on those promises, he knew that the Philistine was destined to fall. So it wasn't so much David having faith in himself, that, I believe, I can take down giants. No. He believed that God could take down giants. And as long as he was walking in the center of God's will and purposes, nothing would thwart the will of God. And so David comes knowing that God had promised the cities of the Philistines to the Israelites, but they had to be courageous. They had to go out and they had to exercise, this, this will of God. And David was unafraid. But David was also a musician, right? We know him as a poet. Think about all the Psalms that David wrote. Many bear his name in the titles. So not only was he a man of courage and a man of war, right? But he was also this mixture of, a musician, a poet, putting into words those deepest feelings that he had been experiencing. How about Psalm 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And even though he says, and he guides uh, uh, my feet in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. See, this is David, the shepherd, now using that as a metaphor for his life, recognizing that God is with him. Ultimately, how does that psalm end? It says, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." See, there is this hope of eternity. There is the promise of God's goodness and his mercy that we're going to experience, all of which comes through this vehicle of his Messiah, the Son of God, that is going to be manifested to the world. And so David now is given a promise by the Lord. The promise is found in verse 16. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Well, can I give you just a quick review of where we've been? Remember, it was in the casket portion of our studies. We looked at creation, we looked at Abraham, we looked at Sinai, which is all the story of Moses leading the people out, and then ultimately bringing them in through Joshua. Then we have uh, the period of kings, and it started off badly, right? People looking at the outer appearance of Saul, big, handsome, a warrior, but he was not God's. It was not God's choosing. They picked for themselves someone that would not fulfill God's will and his purposes. But then David comes along, and God will speak of David and say, David was a man after my own heart. And so here we find David now is anointed as king, and God makes him this promise. He says, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. So David's line is saying will never come to an end. That there it says his throne is going to be established forever. People then in this day looked at this Davidic, covenant that God makes with his people, and it helped to sustain Israel through some of its more darkest times. It it was it was a passage that we did not see fulfilled in all of the lifetime that preceded, um, or proceeded David's life. You could read about it, right? David would have Solomon, his son. But after Solomon, the kingdom divides. And we know now that Israel is no longer this united monarchy. Now the kingdom is divided between a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, it will end badly. The Assyrians are going to come and just overcome the land. The southern kingdom, we do know, right, that it's going to suffer the same fate. But what we noticed is in this southern kingdom, it follows this line of Judah. Judah, you remember who Judah was? Judah, um, we're going to get to him a little bit further on in our story, and we'll talk a little bit more about him. But it's enough to know that he was one of the sons of Jacob, and God made a promise to that there would be one that would come from the line of Judah that will reign. David is from that line. David is born in Bethlehem, in this in this city that will become, that is part of Judah, the territory of Judah, that bears the name of its tribal head. And so David is given this promise, but it's not fulfilled in his son or in any of the descendants of Judah. In fact, after Solomon, the 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 kingdom is divided, as I said, and Rehoboam will be its first king. It doesn't work out well, and then we just see this long list of kings that come in the line of Judah, but many of whom they do as much evil as the northern kingdom, and sometimes, even worse. And so you see generation after generation after generation, but we don't see this promise being fulfilled. And now we're introduced in the very first verse of Matthew chapter 1 to the one who is now the Messiah, Jesus, who is this son of David, the one whose kingdom is going to endure forever, the one whose throne will be established forever. I went to Rome with my wife Cindy, and we took a tour of the Colosseum. Colosseum, right? It has such history, and it wasn't good for that early century of Christians. Nero would uh, would have games here in the Colosseum that you would find Christians being fed to lions, right? Used as night lights, set on fire, placed on poles and lifted up. It was a horrible time, and Rome brought such pain and suffering um, to this early movement. I remember going on this tour and walking into this Colosseum, and we were taken down into the lower depths of the Colosseum where they had this intricate system where the gladiators would be held, and the animals would be brought in. It was fascinating to see how all of this was created. But the thing that took me the most was when we finally went out into the main floor of the Colosseum, and they had put a floor in to give you the sense of what it was like to stand in the center of this Colosseum. And there was a huge stone uh, throne that was set, and there the emperor of Rome would sit. And in its place now, there in the midst of that throne, was a huge cross. And I remember looking at that cross and thinking to myself, who's in charge now? It may not have started well, and it brought so much pain and destruction. But God is absolutely, true when He says that His kingdom is going to endure forever. His throne will be established forever. The world, even in the days in which living, the name of Jesus is being proclaimed in every tongue, every nation of this world. God has His witnesses. He wants His people to go out and proclaim the coming of this kingdom, to talk about Jesus, because this is an opportunity for people to respond to the good news that the kingdom of heaven has come. See, Matthew, in this opening verse, is giving you like the drum roll. It's like the curtain is about to open, and we're being introduced to Jesus, the Messiah, the one who is now the fulfillment of a promise to David. But it doesn't end there. He's also the fulfillment of the promise that was made to Abraham. You got to go back to Genesis chapter 12 when God would take Abraham and make him this promise. He was about 75 years old when he would leave Ur of the Chaldees, which is all the way down in what is now Iran. It's in the Persian Gulf. And God would take this man and he would say to Abram, he says, I want you to leave your country, your people, your father's household, go to the land that I will show you. Abraham's roots are pagan, but God is going to raise this man, and he brings him and he says, I'm going to take you to this land that I'm going to show you. I'm going to make you into a great nation, and I'm going to bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. See, this Davidic covenant that establishes the kingdom and the throne forever, in the Abrahamic covenant, we had God making a promise that all the peoples of the earth will be blessed because of the descendants that will come through Abraham. Abraham will give birth to Isaac, and Isaac will give birth, will father twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob will become the father of the 12 nations, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. And so you begin to recognize that Abraham, even though he only lives long enough to see his grandsons, he has no idea how this promise is going to be fulfilled. But here in the opening line of Matthew, we're told that Jesus is the one who will bless all the peoples of the earth. Jesus is the one whose throne is going to be established forever. Jesus is the one whose kingdom will endure forever. Jesus is the one who has come to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and to release from darkness its prisoners. Jesus is now standing center stage, and Matthew is going to continue with his introduction. I hope that today just gives you a little bit more insight that Jesus is the fulfillment now of all that has gone before. And Matthew's going to try his best to make sure that he hammers that point home. I hope the scriptures become more and more clear to you, that as now we begin this whole New Testament section, we find that in Jesus, he truly is the hope of the world. And as we look to Easter, just in a few weeks, you recognize the importance of the one that God has sent. Thank you so much for joining me today. I trust that this knowledge helps you to seize the day and to recognize that God is good all the time. Lord willing, my friends, we'll spend some more time again tomorrow. But thank you for joining me today on this Monday, April the 7th. Looking forward to tomorrow, God willing. God bless.